The scarlet sun dipped below the dusty horizon as Penelope Lawson's screams echoed against the cellar walls, her fists raw from pounding against the weathered oak door that sealed her fate. It was 1875 in Abiquiu, New Mexico territory, and disobedience carried consequences that could break both body and spirit. "You'll stay there until you learn your place, girl," the voice of Vernon Hawkins, her employer and self-appointed guardian, boomed from above. His boots scraped across the floorboards, each creak a reminder of her imprisonment. Penelope slumped against the cold stone wall, her once pristine blue dress now smeared with dirt and tears. At 20 years old, she had traveled west from Boston after her parents' death, answering an advertisement for a governess position at the Hawkins Ranch. The promise of adventure and independence had quickly soured into servitude under Vernon's increasingly controlling hand. Her crime had been simple. She'd refused his advances the night before. When she threatened to tell his wife, his face had transformed from desire to rage in an instant. Now she was here, locked beneath the main house in a root cellar that smelled of earth and desperation. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, though she knew no one could hear. "Someone help me." The small barred window near the ceiling let in only the faintest moonlight, barely enough to illuminate her prison. Penelope gathered her skirts and settled on a pile of burlap sacks. Her stomach growled, reminding her that her last meal had been breakfast hours before. Vernon had promised she would stay until she learned her lesson, however long that might be. Water dripped somewhere in the corner, a slow, maddening rhythm. Rats scurried along the perimeter, their eyes occasionally catching what little light filtered through. Penelope pulled her knees to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd never felt so utterly alone. Miles away, Quentin Grady adjusted his hat against the setting sun as he guided his horse down the winding trail toward Abiquiu. At 28, he'd seen more of life than most men twice his age. The Civil War had taken his youth, cattle driving had hardened his hands, and years of wandering had taught him the value of a moment's peace. His latest job had ended at a ranch near Santa Fe, and he was heading south with no particular destination in mind. Just a man and his horse, following whatever path opened before them. The fading daylight painted the mesas in amber and gold, the beauty of the landscape not lost on him despite his weariness. "What do you think, Memphis?" he asked, his chestnut gelding. "Might be nice to stop in town for a proper meal and a real bed." The horse nickered in response, ears flicking forward as if in agreement. As night settled fully over the land, Quentin made camp near a small stream, the distant lights of Abiquiu visible in the valley below. Tomorrow, he'd ride into town, perhaps find work for a spell if something caught his interest. He'd learned long ago that plans were like morning fog, best enjoyed briefly before they disappeared in the heat of reality. The fire crackled before him as he stretched out his long frame, hat tipped over his eyes. Sleep came easily to a man with a clear conscience, or so his father had always said. Quentin found it came easier to a man with tired muscles and an empty mind. Dawn broke cold and clear over Abiquiu. Quentin packed his meager belongings and saddled Memphis, the routine so familiar he could have done it blindfolded. The small settlement came into full view as he descended into the valley, a collection of adobe buildings clustered around a church, with scattered homesteads and ranches dotting the surrounding landscape. Abiquiu had grown considerably since the last time Quentin had passed through. The railroad hadn't reached this far yet, but the promise of its coming had drawn more settlers. He guided Memphis down the main street, noting the new mercantile, a hotel that looked recently painted, and the busy saloon where men gathered even at this early hour. His first stop was the stable, where he arranged boarding for Memphis with a wizened Mexican stable master who barely spoke above a whisper. "How long you staying?" the old man asked, running a gnarled hand along Memphis's flank with appreciation. "Not sure yet," Quentin replied honestly. "Got any work around town for a man good with horses and cattle?" The stable master stroked his silver mustache thoughtfully. "Hawkins Ranch always needs hands, big spread east of town, Owners got more land than sense, they say. Quentin nodded his thanks and headed toward the hotel. A hot bath and a meal would come first, then he'd inquire about work. He'd learned to take life one necessity at a time. As he crossed the street, a commotion caught his attention. A woman was arguing with the sheriff outside his office, her face flushed with emotion. "She's been missing 2 days, Sheriff. Penelope never missed our Sunday meetings. Something's happened to her at that ranch, I know it." "Mrs. Blackburn, I can't just ride out to the Hawkins place based on your feeling that your friend missed a social call," the sheriff replied, his tone placating. "It's not just a social call. Penelope was afraid of that man. The things she told me, Vernon Hawkins is a respected rancher in this territory. I need more than gossip before I start making accusations." Quentin slowed his pace, listening with interest. The name Hawkins connected in his mind with what the stable master had mentioned. The woman noticed his attention and turned desperate eyes toward him. "Sir, have you just arrived in town? Have you seen a young woman about 20 with auburn hair and green eyes?" "I'm afraid not, madam," Quentin replied, removing his hat respectfully. "Just rode in this morning." "I'm Isabella Blackburn. My friend Penelope works as a governess at the Hawkins Ranch. She always comes to town on Sundays to attend church and take tea with me afterward. She never missed once in 6 months until this week." Her voice trembled slightly. "She confided that Mr. Hawkins had been improper with her. I fear what might have happened." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Mrs. Blackburn, I've already said, I understand your concern," Quentin interrupted, surprising himself with his involvement. "I was actually heading out to the Hawkins place later today to inquire about work. I could ask after the young lady, see if she's all right." Relief washed over Isabella's face. "Would you? I'd be so grateful. Penelope has no family here, no one to look out for her but me." The sheriff looked both annoyed and relieved at the intervention. "That's mighty neighborly of you, stranger. What's your name?" "Quentin Grady." "Well, Mr. Grady, you let me know if you find anything that requires my attention. Otherwise, I'd appreciate not being bothered with missing governesses who are probably just taking a few days' rest." Quentin nodded, though something in the sheriff's dismissive tone didn't sit right with him. After getting directions to the Hawkins Ranch, he continued to the hotel, his plans for the day shifting to accommodate this unexpected task. In the cellar, Penelope had lost track of time. The darkness seemed endless, broken only by brief periods of gray light through the small window. Her throat burned with thirst, her stomach hollow with hunger. Vernon had appeared once, lowering a bucket of water and stale bread, his eyes cold as he warned her that her stubbornness would only prolong her suffering. "No one's coming for you," he'd said. "Your friend Mrs. Blackburn asked after you in town. I told her you'd taken ill and were resting. By the time anyone gets suspicious, you'll have either learned your place or—" He'd left the threat unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Penelope huddled in the corner farthest from the door, trying to conserve her strength. She'd searched every inch of her prison, looking for weakness in the walls or door, finding nothing. The small window was barred and too high to reach even if she could fit through it. In her darker moments, she wondered if she'd die here, buried beneath the floorboards of a house where children played overhead, unaware of her existence. Vernon's wife Caroline was bedridden with consumption, too weak to notice her husband's predatory nature or the missing governess who taught their 3 children. "I will not break," she whispered to herself, a mantra repeated until the words lost meaning. "I will not break." Quentin arrived at the Hawkins Ranch by mid-afternoon. The main house stood imposing against the backdrop of distant mountains, a large, 2-story structure with a wide porch and gleaming windows that spoke of prosperity. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and cattle grazed in pastures that stretched toward the horizon. A ranch hand directed him to the foreman, a burly man named Hank Fletcher, who eyed Quentin with suspicion from beneath a sweat-stained hat. "We might have work," Fletcher allowed after hearing Quentin's inquiry. "Boss is always looking for good hands during the spring roundup. You got experience. 5 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, 2 years breaking horses in Wyoming territory," Quentin replied evenly. Fletcher nodded, seemingly impressed despite himself. Boss is up at the main house. You can talk terms with him directly. As they walked toward the house, Quentin casually asked, I heard there's a governess who works here. Friend in town was asking after her, said she missed their regular meeting. Fletcher's stride faltered slightly. Miss Lawson? Yeah, she's been here about 6 months teaching the little ones. Boss said she's been sick in bed for a few days. Shame, kids like her well enough. Something in the man's tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by his own words. Quentin filed the information away as they approached the house. Vernon Hawkins proved to be a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard and cold eyes that evaluated Quentin like a piece of livestock. After a brief negotiation of terms, Quentin was hired on a trial basis, with instructions to report to Fletcher the following morning. One more thing, Quentin said as he prepared to leave. I met a woman in town worried about her friend who works here, the governess, Miss Lawson. Said she missed their regular meeting. Hawkins's expression darkened momentarily before settling into practiced concern. Poor girl caught a fever, been in bed for days. My wife's been tending to her personally. Please assure Mrs. Blackburn that Penelope is receiving the best care. Quentin nodded, though the explanation did little to ease the suspicion growing in his mind. That's good to hear. I'm sure Mrs. Blackburn would appreciate a chance to visit her friend when she's feeling better. Of course, Hawkins replied smoothly. Though we wouldn't want to risk spreading illness. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to. As Quentin left the main house, he noticed a small, barred window at ground level near the back of the structure, a cellar of some kind. Most ranches had such spaces for storing food, but something about this one drew his attention. Perhaps it was the fresh scratch marks on the frame, or the way the light caught on what looked like a handprint on the inside of the glass. He casually walked past it, not wanting to draw attention, and made his way to where Memphis was tethered. As he mounted up, he decided to ride the perimeter of the property, ostensibly to familiarize himself with his new workplace, but actually to observe the ranch when no one expected him to be looking. That night, lodged in the bunkhouse with the other hands, Quentin listened to the casual conversation around him, paying particular attention to any mention of the main house or its occupants. The men spoke freely of cattle, horses, and the upcoming roundup, but fell conspicuously silent when Fletcher entered the room. New man, Fletcher acknowledged Quentin with a nod. You'll ride fence line with Davis tomorrow. Be ready at dawn. After Fletcher left, a younger hand named Tommy leaned toward Quentin. You asked about the governess earlier, he whispered. Quentin nodded carefully. Ain't seen her in days. Boss said she's sick, but... Tommy glanced around nervously. Mrs. Hawkins been asking for her too. Overheard the missus crying to her maid that Mr. Hawkins wouldn't let her see Penelope, said the fever was too dangerous. That's so. Quentin kept his tone neutral. Tommy nodded. Mrs. Hawkins is real sick herself, consumption they say, but she and Miss Lawson are close. Strange she wouldn't be allowed to check on her. The conversation shifted as another hand called for a card game, but Quentin had heard enough to strengthen his suspicions. Something was very wrong at the Hawkins ranch, and he intended to find out what. Penelope startled awake at the sound of the cellar door opening. Vernon descended the stairs, lantern in hand, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. She scrambled back, pressing herself against the rough stone. 3 days now, he said, setting the lantern on a barrel. Most women would have begged forgiveness by now. I have nothing to apologize for, Penelope replied, her voice hoarse from thirst but steady with conviction. Vernon smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Your spirit is admirable if misplaced. I've hired a new governess from Santa Fe. She arrives next week. Penelope felt cold fear spread through her chest. If she was being replaced, what did Vernon intend to do with her? Caroline has been asking for you, he continued. I told her you left suddenly, family emergency back east. She was quite upset. He took a step closer. No one is looking for you anymore, Penelope. No one but Mrs. Blackburn, and she's easily managed. You won't get away with this, Penelope said, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Vernon laughed. I already have. This is my land, my town. The sheriff won't question me, and no one else cares about a governess with no family. He set down a small bundle. Food and water, enough for 2 more days. After that, your future depends entirely on your willingness to be reasonable. With that, he turned and climbed the stairs, taking the lantern with him. The door closed with a heavy thud, plunging Penelope back into darkness. She crawled toward where he had left the provisions, finding a water skin and some bread. As she drank desperately, her mind raced. 2 days. She had 2 days to either escape or resign herself to whatever fate Vernon had planned for her. Neither prospect seemed possible. The next day, Quentin rode the fence line with Davis, an older ranch hand with a weathered face and taciturn manner. They worked in companionable silence for most of the morning, mending brakes and checking for signs of predators or rustlers. "How long you been working for Hawkins?" Quentin finally asked as they stopped to water their horses at a stream. Davis shrugged. "Going on 5 years. Pays good, work steady, don't ask questions that ain't about cattle or horses." "Seems like sound advice," Quentin replied, reading between the lines. "You ever interact much with the folks in the main house?" Davis gave him a sharp look. "Like I said, questions that ain't about the herd don't serve a man well here." After a pause, he added in a lower voice, "But if you're asking about that governess, I'd say let sleeping dogs lie. Boss has a temper when crossed." "Appreciate the warning," Quentin said, mounting up. They continued their work, but Quentin's mind stayed fixed on the main house and what secrets it might hold. That evening, after supper in the bunkhouse, Quentin slipped away under the pretense of checking on Memphis. Instead, he made his way toward the main house, keeping to the shadows. Most of the windows were dark, but light spilled from what appeared to be a study on the ground floor. Moving carefully, he approached the small cellar window he'd noticed the day before. Kneeling beside it, he peered into the darkness below. At first he saw nothing, but as his eyes adjusted, he detected movement. Someone was down there. "Hello," he called softly through the bars. "Is anyone there?" For a long moment there was only silence. Then a weak voice replied, "Who's there?" "My name's Quentin Grady. I'm looking for Penelope Lawson. Mrs. Blackburn in town is worried about you." A soft cry came from the darkness, followed by hurried movement. A face appeared at the window, barely visible in the dim light, a young woman with matted auburn hair and desperate eyes. "I'm Penelope," she whispered urgently. "Please help me. He's keeping me prisoner. He says he'll kill me if I don't." Her voice broke. "I'll get you out," Quentin promised, his suspicions confirmed and anger building in his chest. "How long have you been down there?" 3 days, I think." "He's replacing me as governess. I don't have much time." Quentin glanced toward the lit window of the study. "Is there a key to the cellar door?" He keeps it on him. "The door is solid oak, too thick to break through." Quentin considered their options. "I'll come back tomorrow night with tools." "Can you hold on until then?" Penelope's fingers gripped the bars tightly. "Yes, but please hurry, and be careful. Vernon is dangerous. He has the sheriff in his pocket and most of the town afraid of him." "Don't worry about me," Quentin assured her. "Try to conserve your strength." "I promise I'll get you out." He reluctantly left her, mind racing with plans. He'd need to be careful. A direct confrontation with Hawkins would likely end poorly for both him and Penelope. This would require strategy and perfect timing. Back in the bunkhouse, Quentin lay awake long into the night, plans forming and dissolving as he sought the safest path forward. By dawn, he had the beginnings of a strategy, though much would depend on circumstances beyond his control. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Quentin performed his assigned tasks diligently, giving no indication of his true intentions. When Fletcher mentioned that Hawkins would be traveling to Santa Fe the next day to escort the new governess back to the ranch, Quentin saw his opportunity taking shape. That night, after ensuring the other hands were asleep, Quentin slipped out of the bunkhouse with tools he'd gathered throughout the day: a crowbar, a small hand saw, and a length of rope. He made his way to the main house, where only a single light burned in an upstairs window. At the cellar window, he knelt and whispered, "Penelope, I'm here." Her face appeared immediately, relief evident even in the darkness. "Thank God, I was afraid you wouldn't come." "I made a promise," Quentin replied simply. "Stand back from the door. I'm going to try to break it down." He moved silently around the house to where the cellar doors emerged from the ground at an angle. A heavy padlock secured them shut. Using the crowbar, Quentin worked at the lock, trying to minimize the noise while applying enough force to break the mechanism. After several tense minutes, the lock gave way with a dull snap. Quentin carefully lifted one of the doors and descended the wooden steps into the darkness below. The smell of damp earth and desperation filled his nostrils as his eyes adjusted to the gloom. Penelope stood against the far wall, her dress dirty and torn, her face gaunt from days with minimal food and water. Despite her condition, her eyes burned with defiance and hope. "You came," she whispered, as if speaking the words too loudly might dispel the miracle before her. "Let's get you out of here," Quentin replied, moving toward the interior door that led into the main house. It was indeed solid oak with heavy iron hinges and a formidable lock. He examined it briefly before deciding the cellar doors offered a safer exit. Penelope followed him up the stairs into the cool night air, stumbling slightly from weakness. Quentin caught her arm, steadying her. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. "We need to move quickly. I have a horse waiting behind the stable." She nodded determinedly. "I can manage." Anywhere is better than that cellar. They made their way across the yard, keeping to the shadows. Penelope leaned heavily on Quentin's arm, her legs unsteady after days confined in the small space. Just as they reached the corner of the stable, a voice called out from the darkness. "Who's there?" Quentin pushed Penelope behind him as a figure emerged from the stable doorway. "Tommy, the young hand from the bunkhouse." "It's Grady," Quentin replied calmly, though his heart raced. "Just checking on my horse." Tommy's gaze shifted to Penelope, recognition dawning on his face. "Miss Lawson." "They said you were sick." "She was locked in the cellar," Quentin explained quickly. "Hawkins has been lying to everyone." Tommy hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Boss will kill you both if he catches you." "Then help us," Penelope pleaded softly. "Please." After a moment's consideration, Tommy nodded. "Take the north trail. It circles back toward town but stays away from the main road. I'll tell them I didn't see nothing." "Thank you," Quentin said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "We won't forget this." Tommy disappeared back into the stable as Quentin led Penelope to where Memphis was tethered. The horse nickered softly as they approached. "Can you ride?" Quentin asked, helping Penelope toward the saddle. "Yes, though it's been some time," she replied, gathering what strength remained to pull herself up. Quentin mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he guided Memphis toward the north trail. They rode in silence for several miles, putting distance between themselves and the ranch. Penelope leaned back against Quentin's chest, exhaustion finally overtaking her now that immediate danger had passed. "Where are we going?" she asked eventually, her voice barely audible above the rhythm of hoofbeats. "There's a line shack about 10 miles north," Quentin replied. "Used during roundups but empty this time of year. We can rest there, figure out our next move." Penelope nodded, questions filling her mind but lacking the energy to voice them. Who was this man who had risked everything to rescue a stranger? Why had he believed her when even the sheriff had dismissed her friend's concerns? For now, the simple fact of her freedom was enough. The line shack appeared as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Quentin helped Penelope dismount, supporting her weight as they entered the modest shelter. A single room contained a narrow cot, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a small fireplace. "It's not much," Quentin apologized, easing her onto the cot. "It's perfect," Penelope replied with genuine feeling. After the darkness of the cellar, the simple cabin seemed like a palace. Quentin built a fire while Penelope rested, the warmth gradually filling the small space. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water-meager provisions but welcome to Penelope's empty stomach. As she ate slowly, Quentin took the opportunity to properly introduce himself. "I should explain how I came to find you. I rode into Abiquiu looking for work and overheard your friend Mrs. Blackburn arguing with the sheriff about your disappearance." "Isabella," Penelope murmured with a small smile. She never believed Hawkins's lies then. She was quite insistent, Quentin confirmed. The sheriff wasn't interested in investigating, so I offered to inquire at the ranch myself. Why would you do that for a stranger? Penelope asked, genuine curiosity in her tired eyes. Quentin considered the question, wondering himself why he'd become involved. I've seen enough injustice in this world to recognize it when it appears. Something in Mrs. Blackburn's concern rang true, and something in the sheriff's dismissal felt wrong. Penelope studied him thoughtfully. Most men would have minded their own business. I've never been particularly good at that, Quentin admitted with a faint smile. My pa used to say I was born with more conscience than sense. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Quentin's expression grew distant for a moment. He died during the war fighting for the Union. Taught me that standing by while others suffer makes you complicit in their pain. Penelope nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Grady. I was beginning to lose hope down there. Call me Quentin, he replied, and you don't need to thank me. I'm just glad I found you in time. As morning light filtered through the small window, Penelope's exhaustion finally overcame her. Quentin covered her with his coat and stepped outside to tend to Memphis and gather more firewood. When he returned, she was fast asleep, her face peaceful despite the dirt and hardship etched upon it. He settled into one of the wooden chairs, planning their next steps. Hawkins would discover Penelope's absence soon if he hadn't already. The ranch owner struck Quentin as a man who wouldn't take such defiance lightly. He would pursue them, possibly with men from the ranch and maybe even the sheriff's support. They needed to move quickly, but Penelope required rest first. Quentin decided they would remain at the line shack until nightfall, then travel under cover of darkness toward Santa Fe. It was a larger town where Hawkins might have less influence, and from there, they could determine a more permanent solution. Penelope slept through most of the day, waking occasionally to drink water or eat small portions of food. Each time her eyes sought Quentin, as if assuring herself that rescue hadn't been a dream. By late afternoon, some color had returned to her cheeks, though the ordeal had clearly taken its toll. How long were you working for Hawkins? Quentin asked as they shared a simple meal of jerky and the last of the hardtack. Penelope sighed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. 6 months. I came west after my parents died of influenza in Boston. I answered an advertisement for a governess position, thinking it would be an adventure. A bitter smile crossed her lips. I was naive. What happened? At first, everything seemed proper. I taught the children, 3 of them, all under 10, and was treated respectfully. Mrs. Hawkins is a kind woman, though very ill. She and I became friends of a sort. Penelope's expression darkened. But Vernon, he began making advances about 2 months ago. Small things at first, standing too close, finding reasons to touch my hand or shoulder. Quentin's jaw tightened at the familiar story. He'd seen such predatory behavior before. I avoided him when possible, made excuses to never be alone with him. But 3 nights ago, he came to my room after everyone was asleep. Penelope's voice grew strained. When I refused him and threatened to tell his wife, he dragged me to the cellar, said I would stay there until I learned my place or until. She couldn't finish the thought. You're safe now, Quentin assured her, though he knew the words offered little comfort against such a violation of trust and dignity. Penelope met his gaze directly. For how long? Vernon owns half the county. The sheriff won't help us. Where can I possibly go that he won't find me? We'll figure that out, Quentin promised. But first, we need to get further from the ranch. Can you travel tonight? She nodded resolutely. Yes, I won't be the reason we're caught. As dusk approached, they prepared to leave. Quentin had kept watch throughout the day, alert for any sign of pursuit, but the surrounding landscape remained quiet. Either Hawkins hadn't yet discovered their escape, or he was planning something more calculated than an immediate chase. They mounted Memphis together, Penelope sitting in front now that she had regained some strength. The horse carried them east, away from the direction of the ranch, following a game trail that would eventually connect with the road to Santa Fe. The night was clear and cold, stars speckling the vast New Mexico sky. Penelope leaned slightly against Quentin's chest, drawing warmth from his solid presence behind her. Despite the danger of their situation, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. The simple freedom of open air after days in darkness was intoxicating. "Tell me about yourself," she requested after they had ridden in silence for some time. "Who is Quentin Grady when he's not rescuing imprisoned governesses?" Quentin chuckled softly. "Not much to tell. I was born in Illinois, fought in the war when I was barely 18, drifted west afterward. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, whatever honest work I could find. No family. Lost my parents years ago, no siblings, no wife," he hesitated. "Never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots." "A true wanderer," Penelope observed. "What makes a man choose such a life?" Quentin considered the question, surprised by her insight. "Most people didn't ask such things of a stranger. After the war, I saw too much, did too much. Staying still meant remembering, so I kept moving." Penelope nodded, understanding in her silence. "And now?" "Now I'm riding through the wilderness with a woman I barely know, running from a powerful rancher who likely wants us both dead," Quentin replied with dry humor. "Seems I've finally found an adventure worth the trouble." Penelope laughed softly, the sound startling in its unexpectedness. "When you put it that way, Mr. Grady, it does sound rather exciting." Their journey continued through the night, stopping occasionally to rest Memphis and stretch their legs. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, the terrain gradually changing as they moved east. They made camp in a sheltered canyon, where a small stream provided fresh water and cottonwood trees offered cover. Quentin fashioned a simple lean-to, while Penelope gathered kindling for a small, smokeless fire. Working together, they created a temporary haven hidden from casual observation. "We should reach the outskirts of Santa Fe by tomorrow evening if we maintain this pace," Quentin said as they shared the last of his provisions. "From there, we can decide our next move." Penelope nodded, though concern shadowed her eyes. "I have no money, no possessions beyond what I'm wearing." "My options are limited. We'll figure something out," Quentin assured her. "I have some savings, enough to get us both to Denver or maybe even further east if needed." "Us?" Penelope questioned, surprise evident in her voice. "You've done more than enough, Quentin." "I couldn't ask you to append your life further for my sake. Leaving you alone now would hardly be honorable," he replied simply. "Besides, Hawkins likely considers me a horse thief and kidnapper by now. We're in this together whether we planned it or not." Penelope studied him thoughtfully. "You're an unusual man, Quentin Grady." "So I've been told," he acknowledged with a slight smile. They rested through most of the day, taking turns keeping watch. No pursuit materialized, though neither of them believed they had escaped Hawkins's notice entirely. The ranch owner had resources and connections. Their head start would only protect them temporarily. As evening approached, Quentin returned from scouting the surrounding area to find Penelope washing her face in the stream. She had managed to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers, tying it back with a strip torn from the hem of her petticoat. Despite her disheveled appearance and the dirt still clinging to her dress, there was a quiet dignity in her bearing that Quentin found himself admiring. "We should move soon," he said, approaching carefully to avoid startling her. "Cover more ground before full dark." Penelope nodded, rising gracefully despite her obvious fatigue. "I'm ready." They continued their journey as night fell, following the silver ribbon of moonlight that illuminated their path. Penelope seemed stronger now, sitting straighter in the saddle, her body no longer trembling with exhaustion. "Tell me about your life before," Quentin requested after they had ridden in companionable silence for some time. "What was Penelope Lawson like in Boston?" She glanced back at him, surprise evident in her profile. "You want to know about my past? Seems only fair, you know mine." Penelope considered for a moment. "I was the only child of a professor and a seamstress. We lived modestly but comfortably. My father taught literature at a small college. My mother supplemented our income by sewing for wealthy families." A wistful note entered her voice. "They believed in education for women. I learned Latin, mathematics, literature subjects many consider unsuitable for female minds. Intelligence isn't determined by gender," Quentin observed. "A progressive view," Penelope replied with appreciation. After they died, I found myself with an education but few practical skills and no inheritance. Becoming a governess seemed the most respectable option for a woman in my position. And you chose to come west. I wanted adventure, she admitted. The advertisements made the territories sound like a land of opportunity where a person might reinvent themselves. Instead, I found myself more constrained than ever. Quentin nodded thoughtfully. The West has a way of stripping away illusions, good and bad. It shows people as they truly are. Including you, Penelope asked, her voice soft but direct. Especially me, Quentin acknowledged. Out here, there's nowhere to hide from yourself. They lapsed into silence again, each contemplating the unexpected connection forming between them. For Quentin, who had spent years avoiding attachments, the sudden responsibility for another person's welfare should have felt burdensome. Instead, he found himself drawing strength from Penelope's resilience. For Penelope, the trauma of her imprisonment was still raw, yet Quentin's steady presence offered a security she hadn't experienced since her parents' death. He had risked everything for a stranger, asking nothing in return. Such nobility seemed almost anachronistic in the harsh reality of frontier life. As they crested a ridge, the distant lights of isolated homesteads appeared in the valley below. They were approaching more populated areas, a hopeful sign, but also a warning that they would need to proceed with greater caution. We should avoid the main roads, Quentin advised. Hawkins might have men watching the approaches to Santa Fe. Penelope nodded in agreement. Could we circle around to the north? The terrain is rougher, but there are fewer settlements. Quentin looked at her with newfound respect. Good thinking. It will add time to our journey, but safety is worth the delay. They altered their course accordingly, guiding Memphis through increasingly rocky terrain. The horse moved carefully, accustomed to difficult trails from years of work on mountain ranches. Near midnight, they stopped to rest in a small grove of pinyon pines. As Quentin helped Penelope dismount, her legs buckled beneath her, the long ride taking its toll on her already weakened body. He caught her before she fell, strong arms steadying her against his chest. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by the weakness. "Just give me a moment." "Take all the time you need," Quentin replied, his voice gentle. He supported her to a fallen log where she could sit, then busied himself tending to Memphis to allow her privacy to compose herself. When he returned with the canteen, Penelope had regained her composure, though exhaustion lined her face. "We should continue," she insisted. "I don't want to slow our progress." "A few hours' rest won't make much difference," Quentin countered, "and Memphis needs the break as much as we do." Reluctantly, Penelope agreed. They settled beneath the pines, the night air crisp around them. Without a fire, they relied on shared body heat for warmth, sitting close together with Quentin's coat spread across their laps. "What will you do if we reach safety?" Penelope asked suddenly. "Will you continue wandering?" Quentin considered the question. "I haven't thought that far ahead. For now, getting you safely away from Hawkins is enough. And after that, back to drifting from ranch to ranch, perhaps." He glanced at her curious expression. "Why do you ask?" Penelope hesitated. "It seems a lonely existence. A man with your principles and courage could build something meaningful somewhere." "I stopped believing in permanent homes a long time ago," Quentin admitted. "The war taught me how quickly everything can change, how easily what you love can be taken." "So you choose to love nothing?" Penelope's voice held no judgment, only genuine interest. The question struck Quentin with unexpected force. Put so simply, the pattern of his life seemed suddenly hollow. "I wouldn't frame it quite that way," he said finally. "But yes, I've kept my attachments minimal." "I understand," Penelope said softly. "After my parents died, I tried to protect myself the same way, but I think there's more courage in risking loss than avoiding it entirely." Quentin studied her in the moonlight, struck by the wisdom in her words. For a woman who had endured so much, her spirit remained remarkably unbroken. "Get some sleep," he suggested gently. "I'll keep watch." Penelope didn't argue, fatigue overwhelming her reservations. She leaned against his shoulder, and within minutes, her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Quentin remained awake, alert to any sound that might signal danger, but his mind kept returning to Penelope's question. Had he been a coward all these years, running not from the memories of war but from the possibility of new pain? The woman sleeping trustingly against him had faced horrors of her own, yet maintained faith in connections, in possibilities. Perhaps there was something to learn from her courage. The morning brought renewed determination. They continued their journey, making steady progress toward Santa Fe. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the northern outskirts of the town, the sprawling settlement visible in the valley below. "We should wait until dark to enter the town," Quentin advised as they observed from a concealed position on the hillside. "Less chance of being noticed," Penelope agreed, though anxiety colored her features. "What if Hawkins has men watching here as well?" "Santa Fe isn't so large that strangers wouldn't be noticed." "I know someone who might help us," Quentin replied after consideration. "An old friend who runs a livery on the edge of town. He owes me a favor and isn't the type to ask questions." As dusk fell, they approached the livery stable from a back trail, avoiding the main streets. The establishment was modest but well maintained, lanterns casting warm light from within the barn. Quentin dismounted and helped Penelope down, keeping a protective arm around her waist as they approached. A burly man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the barn, squinting suspiciously until recognition dawned on his weathered face. "Grady, that really you?" The man's voice was gruff but welcoming. "Hello, Ezra," Quentin replied with genuine warmth. "Been a while." Ezra glanced between Quentin and Penelope, taking in their travel-worn appearance and the tension in their posture. "Guessing this ain't a social call." "We need a place to lay low," Quentin confirmed. "Just for tonight, I'll explain, but not out here." Ezra nodded, gesturing them inside. "Bring your horse around back, less eyes that way." The interior of the barn was warm and smelled of hay and leather. Ezra led them to a small office at the rear, where a pot of coffee simmered on a small stove. After settling Memphis in a stall with fresh hay and water, Quentin joined Penelope and Ezra, accepting a cup of strong coffee gratefully. Briefly, he explained their situation, omitting specific details but making it clear they were fleeing from danger. Ezra listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Hawkins," he muttered when Quentin finished. "Man's got a reputation even here in Santa Fe. Heard stories about how he treats his workers, especially the women." "Then you understand why we need to move quickly," Quentin pressed. "Is the evening stage still running to Denver?" Ezra nodded. "Leaves tomorrow at noon, but you'll need papers for the lady if you're crossing territorial lines." "Questions get asked these days." Penelope's face fell at this complication. "I have nothing, no identification, no money." "I might know someone who can help with that," Ezra offered carefully. "Costs money, though." "I have savings," Quentin replied. "How much?" They discussed arrangements for the next hour, Ezra offering information and suggestions based on his knowledge of the territory. By the time they finished, a plan had taken shape. They would stay in rooms above the livery for the night, obtain falsified papers for Penelope in the morning, and catch the noon stage to Denver. "What about Memphis?" Quentin asked, reluctant to abandon his faithful horse. "I'll keep him here," Ezra promised. "When things cool down, you can send word where to ship him, or come back for him yourself if things work out that way." Ezra showed them to simple but clean rooms above the stable with a shared washroom between them. For Penelope, the prospect of hot water and soap seemed like unimaginable luxury after days of captivity and flight. "Take your time," Quentin encouraged as Ezra provided her with a borrowed nightgown and robe. "We're safe here for tonight." Left alone, Penelope sank into the steaming bath with a sigh that released days of tension. She scrubbed away the grime of the cellar and their journey, watching the dirty water swirl away with a sense of rebirth. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin revealed a face thinner than she remembered, with shadows beneath her eyes. But the woman looking back at her seemed stronger somehow, more determined than the naive governess who had arrived in New Mexico 6 months ago. In the adjacent room, Quentin also cleaned up, trimming his beard and washing away the dust of travel. He counted his savings, calculating what they would need for tickets, documentation, and establishing themselves somewhere new. It would be enough, barely, but only if he continued with them to Denver. The realization that he was now irrevocably committed to Penelope's future brought both concern and an unexpected sense of purpose. Later, they shared a simple meal Ezra had brought from a nearby cantina: beans, tortillas, and coffee. Sitting at the small table in Quentin's room, they discussed their plans in low voices. "We'll need a story," Quentin pointed out. "For the stage, for Denver, for wherever we end up." Penelope considered this practical concern. Siblings would attract less attention than alternatives. Quentin nodded, though something in him rebelled at the thought. Brother and sister, then, traveling to Denver to join family after the death of our parents back east. Simple and believable, Penelope agreed, though we look nothing alike. It was true his dark hair and blue eyes contrasted sharply with her auburn tresses and green gaze. Quentin smiled slightly. Half-siblings, perhaps, different mothers. Their planning continued, each detail cementing the reality of their shared future. Neither acknowledged the growing connection between them, the way their eyes lingered when the other wasn't looking, the casual touches that seemed to occur with increasing frequency. "You should rest," Quentin finally said as Penelope stifled a yawn. "Tomorrow will be another long day," she nodded, rising from her chair. At the doorway to her room, she paused, turning back to him with an expression of sincere gratitude. "Quentin, thank you. Not just for the rescue, but for staying with me through this. I know you had other plans before our paths crossed." "No plans worth mentioning," he replied honestly, "and this feels more important than drifting aimlessly." Penelope smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "Good night, then." "Good night, Penelope." Morning brought renewed energy and purpose. Ezra had already left to arrange their documentation when Quentin and Penelope came downstairs. They broke their fast with leftover tortillas and fresh coffee, discussing final preparations for their departure. "Once we reach Denver," Quentin said, "we'll need to find work. I can always find ranch work, but you might prefer something that uses your education." Penelope nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps teaching in a proper school or tutoring. Denver is growing quickly. There should be opportunities for both of us." The casual way she included him in her future plans warmed something in Quentin's chest. For years, he had avoided thinking beyond the next job, the next town. Now, he found himself imagining a life with purpose, with connection. Ezra returned mid-morning with the promised documents, a marriage certificate, and travel papers identifying them as Quentin and Penelope Graham, traveling to Denver to establish a new home. The change in their fictional relationship from siblings to spouses brought a flush to Penelope's cheeks, but she recognized the practical advantages. A married couple would face fewer questions and enjoy greater protection under the law. "It was simpler this way," Ezra explained gruffly, noting their surprise. "Married women traveling with husbands don't get questioned. Besides, you don't look like family." Quentin paid for the documents and thanked Ezra for his help. They gathered their meager belongings. Ezra had provided Penelope with a simple but clean dress and shawl to replace her tattered garments and prepared to leave for the stage depot. "Be careful," Ezra warned as they said their goodbyes. "Hawkins has connections beyond Abiquiu. Keep your story straight and your eyes open." With final expressions of gratitude, they departed, walking through Santa Fe's busy streets with the cautious alertness of prey animals in open territory. Quentin kept Penelope's arm tucked in his, their posture that of a married couple on an ordinary journey. The stage depot bustled with activity, travelers coming and going, freight being loaded, horses being changed out for fresh teams. Quentin purchased their tickets under their assumed names, maintaining a calm demeanor despite the tension coiling within him. As they waited for the stage to depart, Penelope suddenly stiffened beside him. "The man by the water trough," she whispered, her face turned away. "He works for Hawkins, one of his foremen." Quentin casually glanced in the indicated direction. A hard-faced man in range clothes was speaking with the station manager, gesturing in a way that suggested he was asking questions. Fletcher, the foreman Quentin, had met briefly at the ranch. "Don't look at him," Quentin murmured. "Turn toward me like we're having a private conversation." Penelope obeyed, shifting so her back was to Fletcher. Quentin positioned himself to shield her from direct view, bending his head close to hers as if sharing an intimate moment. "He's showing something to the manager," Penelope whispered, anxiety tightening her voice. "A paper, probably a description of us." Quentin nodded slightly, mind racing through their options. The stage wouldn't depart for another 20 minutes. If Fletcher was showing their descriptions, it wouldn't take long for someone to notice them. "We need to move," he decided. Slowly, casually, "There's a cantina across the street. We'll go there, then circle back to Ezra's once Fletcher leaves." They rose and walked unhurriedly toward the exit, Quentin's arm around Penelope's waist, her head resting on his shoulder like a woman in love. They had almost reached the door when the station manager's voice called out behind them, "Mr. Graham, a moment of your time, sir." Quentin hesitated, then turned with a practiced smile. "Yes," the manager approached, Fletcher following with narrowed eyes. "This gentleman is looking for a young couple, says they're wanted for theft in Abiquiu. Mind showing him your papers?" Penelope's fingers dug into Quentin's arm, but her face remained composed. Quentin produced their documents with a steady hand. "Certainly, though I can assure you we've just arrived from Missouri. My wife and I are relocating to Denver." Fletcher examined the papers, suspicion evident in his gaze. "These two match the description I was given, the woman especially." "Is that so?" Quentin replied mildly. "My wife and I have never been to Abiquiu. Perhaps you're confusing us with someone else." Fletcher's hand moved toward his holstered pistol. "I think you'd better come with me for questioning. Mr. Hawkins is very interested in speaking with you both." The situation balanced on a knife's edge. Quentin calculated their chances. The depot was crowded with witnesses, but Fletcher was armed and clearly determined. Before he could decide on a course of action, the depot door opened behind them, and a commanding voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" All eyes turned to the newcomer, a tall man wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal, his weathered face suggesting years of experience with troublesome situations exactly like this one. "No problem, Marshal," the station manager replied quickly. "Just a case of mistaken identity, it seems." The marshal's shrewd gaze moved between Quentin, Penelope, and Fletcher. "Is that so?" He addressed Fletcher directly. "You have a warrant for these people?" Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. "No warrant yet, Marshal, just instructions to bring them in for questioning regarding theft of property." "What property might that be?" The marshal inquired, his tone deceptively casual. Fletcher hesitated, clearly unprepared for official scrutiny. "A horse, some valuables from the main house, and the woman was employed by Mr. Hawkins left without proper notice." The marshal turned to Quentin and Penelope. "And your side of this, Mr. Graham," Quentin supplied. "Quentin Graham and my wife, Penelope, we're traveling to Denver to establish our home there. As I told this gentleman, we've never been to Abiquiu and own nothing that doesn't rightfully belong to us." The marshal examined their papers thoughtfully. "These appear to be in order." He returned them to Quentin, then addressed Fletcher again. "Without a warrant or solid evidence, you have no authority to detain these people. If Mr. Hawkins wishes to pursue this matter, he can file a formal complaint through proper channels." Fletcher's jaw tightened, but he recognized the futility of arguing with a federal marshal. With a curt nod, he turned and left the depot, his posture radiating frustrated anger. The marshal watched him go, then returned his attention to Quentin and Penelope. "I suggest you continue your journey as planned, Mr. and Mrs. Graham. The noon stage will be departing shortly." "Thank you, Marshal," Quentin replied, genuine gratitude in his voice. "We appreciate your intervention." The marshal nodded, his expression suggesting he understood more than had been spoken aloud. "Safe travels to Denver." With that, he departed, leaving Quentin and Penelope to breathe silent sighs of relief. They returned to their seats to wait for the stage, both acutely aware of how narrowly they had avoided disaster. "That was Providence," Penelope murmured, her hand still clutching Quentin's arm. "Or remarkable timing," Quentin agreed. Either way, we should accept the gift and be on our way before Fletcher returns with reinforcements. The next hour passed with excruciating slowness, both of them tense with anticipation of further confrontation. When the stage was finally called, they boarded quickly, taking seats inside the crowded coach. 6 other passengers joined them: a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, a young mother with a sleeping infant, and a Catholic priest reading quietly from a small Bible. As the stage lurched into motion, Penelope leaned against Quentin's shoulder, exhaustion and relief making her light-headed. They were leaving Santa Fe, leaving New Mexico territory altogether. With each mile, the threat of Hawkins would diminish, allowing them to begin building something new. The journey to Denver would take several days, with overnight stops at coaching stations along the route. They traveled in relative comfort. All things considered, the stage was well maintained, the driver skilled at navigating the challenging terrain. Their fellow passengers were largely incurious about the quiet couple who kept to themselves, offering only the barest details about their background when social necessity demanded conversation. On the second night, at a small coaching station in southern Colorado, they were assigned a private room due to limited space. The situation created an awkward moment as they stood before the single narrow bed, their pretense of marriage suddenly very real. "I'll sleep on the floor," Quentin offered immediately, removing his coat to create a makeshift pallet. Penelope watched him with a thoughtful expression. "That's unnecessary. The bed is small but adequate for 2, and you need proper rest as much as I do." Quentin hesitated, aware of the propriety issues at stake. "I wouldn't want to compromise your comfort or reputation." A smile touched Penelope's lips. "According to our papers, we've been married for over a year. No one would think twice about us sharing a bed." When he still appeared uncertain, she added softly, "I trust you, Quentin, completely." Her words settled something within him. They prepared for sleep with careful courtesy, maintaining modest privacy despite the close quarters. When they finally lay side by side in the narrow bed, a respectful distance between them despite the confined space, Quentin found himself acutely aware of Penelope's presence, the soft sound of her breathing, the faint scent of soap in her hair, the warmth radiating from her body. "What will happen when we reach Denver?" Penelope asked quietly in the darkness. Quentin considered the question. "We find work, establish ourselves, create new identities far enough from Hawkins that he can't reach us. Together," the word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "If that's what you want," Quentin replied carefully. "I made a promise to see you safely situated. Beyond that, the choice is yours." Penelope was silent for a long moment. "And what do you want, Quentin?" The question caught him off guard. For so long, his wants had been simple: the next job, the next town, survival without complication. Now, lying beside this remarkable woman who had endured so much yet maintained her strength and dignity, he found himself wanting things he'd denied for years. "I want." He hesitated, searching for honesty. "I want to stop running, to build something lasting, and I find myself wanting to do those things with you, though I have no right to ask it." In the darkness, Penelope's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. "Perhaps I'm asking." Quentin turned to face her, though he could barely make out her features in the dim light. "Penelope, we've known each other less than a week, under the most extreme circumstances. Your feelings might change once we reach safety, once you have choices beyond necessity. Do you think what I feel is merely gratitude or desperation?" Her voice held a note of challenge. "I think what we both feel has been intensified by danger and proximity," Quentin replied honestly. "I don't doubt its sincerity, only its durability." Penelope squeezed his hand gently. "Then let's make a pact. When we reach Denver, we'll establish separate lives, find work, create new connections. If after 3 months we still feel this connection, we'll consider it genuine and act accordingly." The proposal was sensible, honorable, and surprisingly difficult for Quentin to accept, though he recognized its wisdom. 3 months, he agreed finally, time to be certain for both our sakes. They sealed the agreement with nothing more than the continued clasp of their hands, eventually drifting to sleep with the promise of future possibility between them. The remainder of their journey passed without incident. Each day brought them further from danger, closer to the potential of a new beginning. They learned each other's habits and preferences, shared stories of their pasts, and gradually built a foundation of genuine understanding beneath the artificial construct of their marriage. Denver welcomed them with the bustling energy of a city in transition, part frontier outpost, part emerging metropolis. After securing modest accommodations in a respectable boarding house, they began the process of establishing their new lives. True to their agreement, they maintained the appearance of marriage in public while creating separate spheres. Quentin found work at a livery stable, his experience with horses quickly earning him the owner's respect. Penelope secured a position teaching at a small school for girls, her education and refined manners making her an ideal instructress despite her youth. Weeks passed, then a month, their new routines becoming comfortable if not entirely satisfying. They saw each other daily, sharing meals and exchanging news of their respective days, but maintained the careful distance they had agreed upon. The boarding house provided them adjacent rooms, allowing privacy while preserving their public story. As the 3-month mark approached, both found themselves increasingly aware of the pending decision. Neither spoke of it directly, though the knowledge colored their interactions with subtle tension. 2 weeks before their deadline, Quentin returned to the boarding house to find Penelope waiting for him in the small parlor, her expression troubled. "What is it?" he asked immediately, concern sharpening his voice. She handed him a newspaper folded to an inner page. "This arrived from Santa Fe today." Quentin scanned the indicated article, his jaw tightening as he read. Vernon Hawkins had been killed in a confrontation with a U.S. Marshal, the same man who had intervened on their behalf at the stage depot. According to the report, the marshal had been investigating allegations of labor abuses at the Hawkins ranch when the owner drew a weapon, forcing the marshal to fire in self-defense. "It's over," Quentin said quietly, returning the paper to Penelope. "Hawkins can't hurt you anymore." Tears glimmered in Penelope's eyes, though her expression suggested relief rather than grief. His poor wife and children, they didn't deserve any of this. Quentin nodded, understanding her compassion for the innocent family caught in Vernon's web of cruelty. The article mentions his wife's brother taking over management of the ranch. Perhaps they'll be better cared for now. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the implications of this development. Their flight, their false identities, their careful precautions all had been necessitated by a threat that no longer existed. "This changes things," Penelope finally said, her gaze meeting Quentin's directly. "We're free to go our separate ways without fear. Our agreement was based on circumstances that no longer apply." Quentin felt an unexpected hollowness in his chest at her words. "Is that what you want, to dissolve our arrangement early?" Penelope studied him thoughtfully. "What I want hasn't changed, Quentin. But now you have a genuine choice without obligation or danger compelling you. You can return to your life of wandering if that's still what you desire." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Quentin considered the path his life had taken since that day in Abiquiu, the unexpected purpose he had found, the connections he had formed not just with Penelope, but with others in Denver. For the first time in years, he had begun to feel rooted, part of something larger than his own survival. "I don't want to wander anymore," he said finally, the truth of it settling in his bones. "And I don't want to wait another 2 weeks to tell you that I love you, Penelope, not from gratitude or circumstance or convenience, but because of who you are, your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. I love you and I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears spilled freely down Penelope's cheeks now, but her smile was radiant. "I love you too, Quentin. I think I have since that first night at the Line Shack, when you offered to sleep on the floor rather than compromise my dignity, even though we were miles from civilization with no one to judge us but ourselves." He moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Then may I ask, officially this time, Penelope Lawson, will you marry me? For real, not just on paper. Yes, she replied without hesitation. Though technically, according to our documents, we're already married. Quentin laughed softly. Then consider this a renewal of vows we never actually took. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged without words. When they parted, both knew with certainty that their connection was no product of extreme circumstances, but something genuine and lasting. The wedding took place a month later in a small church in Denver, with new friends serving as witnesses. Penelope wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her auburn hair adorned with wildflowers. Quentin, in a new suit that still felt strange compared to his usual range clothes, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder, still sometimes disbelieving his good fortune. Their vows were brief but heartfelt, spoken with the sincerity of people who understood the value of promises kept. The minister pronounced them husband and wife with a warm smile, unaware that the couple before him had already faced trials that tested the strength of their commitment far beyond what most newlyweds could imagine. Life settled into patterns both comfortable and challenging. Quentin eventually became partner in the livery business, expanding it to include horse breeding and training. Penelope continued teaching while writing educational materials that gained popularity throughout Colorado and beyond. Together, they purchased a small house on the outskirts of Denver, with enough land for Quentin to raise horses and for Penelope to plant the garden she had always wanted. A year after their wedding, Memphis arrived from Santa Fe, accompanied by a letter from Ezra expressing his pleasure at their happiness and successful new life. The horse, now aging but still spirited, became a beloved part of their growing family. In the spring of their second year of marriage, their son was born William Quentin Grady, named for Quentin's father. He inherited his mother's green eyes and his father's determined nature, crawling and then walking earlier than most children, eager to explore the world around him. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, Elizabeth Rose, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn curls. Family life suited them both in ways neither could have predicted during their earlier years of isolation and wandering. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Quentin and Penelope often sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. Sometimes they spoke of the past of the cellar where Penelope had been imprisoned, of the desperate flight across the territory, of the twist of fate that had brought them together. I sometimes wonder if I should be grateful to Vernon Hawkins, Penelope admitted one such evening, her head resting against Quentin's shoulder. If not for his cruelty, we might never have met. Quentin considered this. I prefer to think we would have found each other somehow. Perhaps in less dramatic circumstances, but some connections seem destined regardless of the path. Penelope smiled at the unexpected romanticism from her usually practical husband. I like that thought, that we were always meant to find each other, across any distance or difficulty. The evidence supports it, Quentin replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. What else explains a drifter suddenly deciding to involve himself in a stranger's troubles, or a proper Boston governess trusting her life to a man she just met? Love at first rescue, Penelope teased gently. Something like that, Quentin agreed with a smile. Though I think I fell in love with your spirit first, the way you refused to break, even in the darkest moments. They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Their hands remained intertwined, a habit formed during those first tense days of flight that had evolved into an unconscious expression of their connection. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge, even at their young ages, that they were deeply loved and protected. The family Quentin and Penelope had created together stood as testament to the possibility of finding joy after hardship, of building something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. You ever miss wandering? Penelope asked softly, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it nonetheless. Quentin gazed out at the land they had cultivated together, at the home they had built not just of wood and stone but of shared dreams and mutual respect. Not for a moment, he replied with absolute certainty. Everything I was searching for, I found the day I broke down that cellar door. The stars continued their ancient dance overhead, witnesses to promises kept in love that had flourished against all odds in the wild expanse of the American West.